For as long as humans have existed, we've looked up at the sky and wondered whether we are alone in the universe. Throughout history, every civilization has told stories of things they can't explain. And as a species, we've sought proof that extraterrestrial life exists. But could that proof be out there right now and we just don't want to admit it? And in this episode, we're going to separate the fact from fiction. Because for every witness that we want to believe wholeheartedly, there's a convincing hoax that we know not to be true. And while there are some people out there making millions from fake UFO sightings, there are some that are working tirelessly to expose classified files so that we, the public, can make our own judgment on what's actually been recorded. Because the truth is that something recently has changed. Whereas in the past, the powerful across the world would laugh at you for mentioning UFOs, they are the ones now investigating them. Men and women from across the globe, sworn to tell the truth, are coming forward to say they've seen things that they can't explain. And redacted documents are finally being set upon the eyes of the public, and we are finally able to identify an undeniable truth. Today, we're going to go back to the beginning. We're going to tell you about the people that try to tell the lie of otherworldly creatures, but we're also going to feature witnesses that swear they've seen creatures from other worlds. And by the end of this episode, you will understand why, for the first time in history, the question isn't whether people believe in aliens. It's why governments around the world are looking up into the sky and admitting that we are not alone. Let's go back to where it all started. And let me ask you, Joey, do you believe in aliens?
I definitely believe in extraterrestrial life. Yeah, I don't know whether I would necessarily call them aliens. Do I necessarily believe that there are little green men walking about and stuff like that? I don't know I'd go that far. But I actually do believe that if you don't think that as massive as the solar system is, that there are other planets out there that are habitable for life forms, I think you're an idiot, to be honest. And do I believe that aliens have ever been here? I don't know. I've got some serious questions that I've always had about the pyramids. I'm not joking now. I'm being deadly serious. I've got some questions I've always had about the pyramids. And I think I've got a little bit of a belief that there may be some form of extraterrestrial help involved with building them.
Well, if you want us to cover that story, because we're not going to talk about the pyramids in this episode, and perhaps we should have. I mean, there's a lot to cram in, as you can imagine, talking about the entirety of alien existence in one Joey and Josh podcast. So forgive us for just admitting that for 1 second. But if you do want us to cover the pyramids, then we absolutely will. Let us know in the comments below. I, like you, Joey, have had this thing throughout my entire childhood, my life since then, of saying that, yes, I do believe that aliens are out there. Obviously, it's permeated culture. I remember growing up watching E.T. I remember seeing all of the alien films. I remember seeing all this thing, even Alien Autopsy with Anton Deck. Don't ever remember that one, but that is an absolute cult classic, which we will talk about in this episode. But I feel that there's a shared culture. There's something out there that just wants us to admit that we aren't alone and we can't possibly come to the truth that we are. And in fact, again, people keep saying this, it would be far more sad and more lonely if we were completely isolated in the universe. Whereas I feel that there is a bit of hope that there is some sentience out there, perhaps more sentient than ourselves. There might be a being that will be able to educate us.
I think I was very similar to you in that way of, obviously I wasn't a massive E.T. fan itself, but growing up, I was addicted to the X-Files. You know this. I used to watch all of its episodes. And although there were so many different storylines in there and themes they ran with, a consistent theme was obviously extraterrestrial life. So that was something that I'd often thought about. And just to bring it back to that, you know, I remember, I don't know if this is an accurate statistic or whatever, but someone once told me that our actual solar system is like the equivalent to a grain of sand on a massive beach. And there's so many others out there. And simplistically, as it might might sound, my mind just thought, well, as if the chances of creating a habitable planet, which they still don't know whether planets in our solar system were habitable before, like Mars, for example, then yeah, I think that the law of averages would suggest, of course there is. There'll be multiple ones, whether or not they would want to come to a planet like ours that they might perceive as being hostile, which I probably would if I was from another planet. We've got war amongst our own people. Whether or not they'd want to come here is a different thing.
That's the thing. And look, for me, right, one of my favourite films of all time is 2001: A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick. I don't know if you've ever watched that film, but it is fascinating when you do think back and go, how would aliens view us? And it's very interesting to think that we are probably so silly and so stupid in the grand scheme of things, the way that extraterrestrial life might actually end up perceiving us, that we are just like, I suppose we're still in, we're apes. We aren't evolutionary that far along. So it would be fascinating to put yourself in the shoes of these extraterrestrial beings. But why don't I first try and wind the clock back and sort of try to understand why culture has become so fascinated with unidentified flying objects. Shall we start there?
Yep, love to.
Well, in 1947, the term UFO was coined by Captain Edward J. Ruppelt from the United States Air Force. And this was a time post-World War II, and it was coming into the Cold War, where spies, espionage, and experimental aircraft were flying above us. And this meant that more and more attention looked upwards towards the skies. And even though strange objects, beings, depictions were in paintings from as far back as the 3rd century BC.
And in the pyramids.
And in the pyramids, as Joey very rightly says, I mean, don't even talk to Joey about hieroglyphics. I mean, he'd be there for 3 years talking about that. But this culturally has been in our lexicon for a very long time indeed. But what was clear is that we never really had a catch-all term to describe these extraterrestrial beings without referring to them as just aliens. And that was until a small airbase in Nevada, United States, came out as being one of the most interesting and perhaps concerning places in the entire world. And this is where the myth of UFOs really kicks off.
So we're going to speak about a place that I've pretty much known the name of my whole life.
Yeah.
Pretty much never known actually what goes on there, but we're going to try and give it some answers. And that place, of course, is Area 51. Right, so Area 51 is located in the southern Nevada desert, sitting directly on the edge of a large dry salt flat called Groom Lake. It's actually about 83 miles north of Las Vegas, and for a very long time, we have known very little about it. So here's what we do know. The US military deployed on Groom Lake Salt Flat in 1942 as a bombing and gunnery range during the Second World War. And by 1955, the location was actually ironically renamed Paradise Ranch. And Paradise Ranch was the home to Clarence Kelly Johnson. Kelly Johnson was an American aeronautical engineer and was generally considered to be one of the best aircraft designers in American history. He worked for Lockheed Martin, who were the world's largest aerospace arms, defense, and information security corporations. It was there that he ran Lockheed's Skunk Works project. And Skunk Works was basically a division of hand-picked engineers. And Kelly Johnson basically made it into a place where they would design and test out secret spy planes. So even going back now 70 odd years, this was still a very secretive location. So much so that when they actually went and checked this location out, they went so under the skies of filmmakers from Hollywood, basically saying that they wanted to use the remote location to shoot a movie. And I said that the name Paradise Ranch was obviously ironic, and that's because it was no paradise. However, it is disputed about whether or not the people that actually went to stay there genuinely knew this. Obviously, with the name Paradise Ranch, you're picturing something lovely, Josh, aren't you?
Yeah, you literally are. You're picturing something idyllic, maybe an oasis in the middle of the desert. I don't think Area 51 really was that kind.
I definitely don't think it was that. It wasn't quite a paradise. You could maybe say it as a ranch at that. Basically, over the next 25 odd years, the area was pretty much known for building, testing, and operating aircrafts, fighter jets, and obviously speculation that there was other things going on there in terms of building sort of secretive weapons, equipment, a lot of stuff that would have been used in various wars. And Paradise Ranch was one of a few names. It was also called Watertown, again, very ironic in my opinion. And by 1958, it was legally withdrawn from public use. It was around this time that many people started calling it Area 51. And that was because around that time when it was withdrawn from public use, that was because they were actually expanding on it. There was something called Project 51, and it was basically an expansion of the runway that was available in that area. And to be honest, I can't really find all that much to suggest that there was even that much interest in this area. People weren't necessarily all that intrigued by what was going on out in the desert, 80 odd miles north of Las Vegas. But there is a bit of a misperception with this, and that was that it only sort of started around 1989 when people started to talk about unidentified flying objects in this area. And actually, you can look at it in a very simple way and say, of course, there was discussions about unidentified flying objects in this area because it was a place that they were working on aeroplanes and stuff like that, spy jets, Josh, fighting jets that people wouldn't have known.
B2, I think, was originally sort of, I don't know, not built there, but it was tested around that area. And again, when you first saw the B2, I mean, that was made tens of years ago. Like we're talking like in the middle of the century, last century. That was a really alien looking craft. Like that was like jet black. It was very angular. And again, people had never seen anything like that. So even if you were someone living in the 1950s looking up and you're seeing a B2, you'd go, my God, what is that?
Even me, like, mate, I often watch old videos on like online of the old Concorde because I don't remember ever flying the Concorde plane. I'm pretty sure I didn't. It was pretty much gone by the time that we came around. Therefore, if I was in a time before televisions were in people's houses and stuff like that, obviously long before the internet, if you saw a Concorde even back then, you're going to think, hold on, that's flying in a different way at a different height and a completely different speed to anything I'm used to seeing. And therefore, unidentified flying objects wouldn't necessarily be a straight line conclusion in people's mind to say, right, that has not come from this planet. So UFOs, unidentified flying objects, were definitely spotted in that area long before. Now, it has been explained at times that the U-2 aircraft was one of these unidentified flying objects that many people reported to have seen. And they basically said that it flew at a height where, although it was dark on the ground, the sun was still in the sky, and the sun would basically have the rays catch on the wings and therefore almost shine like a bit of a spotlight down at the ground as it would fly, and therefore could look like an object. Basically an optical illusion is what people were going for.
And that's the key thing, because I think when you look at this, like we'll show an image of it on screen right now, I think when you look at it, you think that looks like a traditional aircraft. There's nothing that strange about it, especially if you saw it very close up. But this is the thing, like perhaps they were using certain reflective materials, or perhaps the way that the light just caught off the wings, it didn't look like a normal aircraft. So I could completely understand that. And again, the way that light does reflect or refract off some of these metallic surfaces, it does seem slightly strange. So I can understand people saying that.
I can understand it for sure. And look, as we say, it wasn't like there was much information to be able to still be relayed to the current day from before it started getting used. But what most people would say is most of the sightings pretty much started as soon as Kelly Johnson was operating in that area with the skunk works. And obviously, due to the fact that it was a secret airbase, it's not like government officials or anything like that were able to keep putting out explanations for what people had seen. To be honest, I think a lot of people just kind of minded their own business a lot more back in those days because there wasn't that immediate attachment to could this be something non-human. But as I say, the entire perception of Area 51 would all change in 1989 when a man named Bob Lazar went to a Las Vegas television station and claimed that Area 51 was secretly studying extraterrestrial technology. Now, Bob Lazar claimed that he worked as a physician near Area 51 at an offshoot base, basically, called S4, Sector 4, and he claims that he was fired from his job after he took some friends to the base. Now, he also claimed to have been sworn to secrecy in these claims, so obviously it kind of asks the question, why were you taking friends there? And he claimed that in Sector 4, they had a total of 9 flying saucers that they had captured and that had basically come from outside of planet Earth and had come and interacted with us. He claimed they were not built by humans. He claimed to have read numerous classified documents which held information about alien interaction with planet Earth. And he even was said to have initially claimed that he saw extraterrestrial life himself. He basically said that when he was at S4, he walked past a room and glanced inside. He saw 2 men that were wearing lab coats, almost scientist-esque, and they were staring down and they were having a conversation with a small grey humanoid figure. He later actually kind of retracted it though and casted a bit of doubt on that. He basically said he couldn't definitively say what he saw that day. And to be honest with you, Josh, Bob Lazar's claims are pretty much the start and then finish for me of the suspicion around Area 51. So let's look at some of his specific claims and see just how credible they are. Starting off, people do genuinely tend to believe stuff that's coming out of people's mouths who they consider to be highly intelligent. Have you ever heard Bob Lazar on the Joe Rogan or anything like that? Ever heard him talk?
Yeah, he comes across as a very intelligent man, I would say.
He definitely does. He speaks well. He knows a lot. He's obviously got that sort of background where he knows a lot about science and stuff like that. To someone that doesn't know that, he seems like he could be the real deal when he's speaking. And I mentioned science because there was a scientific element to his claims. Element, pardon the pun, it was called Element 115. And this was something that he claimed was basically used as fuel for these flying saucers in his words. And obviously over time, he claimed it as something that generated an anti-gravity propulsion system, allowing the craft to distort space-time. But this was in 1989, and people like you and me didn't know what Element 115 even was. It wasn't on the periodic table or anything like that. And that meant by the year of 2003, when it officially was discovered and added to the periodic table under the name Moscovium, many people started to feel like his claim held a lot of weight. But when Russian scientists themselves synthesized Element 115, Moscovium, in a lab, they were able to say that the claims that Bob had about Moscovium definitely didn't match what they had found. Because the reality was that Moscovium was highly unstable, it had a half-life of milliseconds, and it possesses no anti-gravity properties. And then more things kind of started to unravel. Bob claimed he worked at S4, but there was no evidence that S4 ever existed. In fact, there was probably more evidence to say that it didn't exist. You've got to remember, despite never telling us what was going on there, the government didn't really hide the existence of Area 51, did they? And therefore, we knew that something was there, whereas the government have never, to date, by the way, it could still happen, they've never come out and said that S4 was a place. There's obviously been a lot of people that have looked for S4, a lot of people that were questioned over whether they were at S4, and it hasn't really yielded many results.
Something I've always thought about is, do you reckon the government are like intentionally making this sort of like an open-ended question, diverting people away from what the actual truth of this base might actually be? Because if you perceive this base to be a UFO thing, people can laugh at it and sort of dismiss it as being obviously fake fake and false. Whereas if it is a top secret military-based testing technology that you otherwise wouldn't want people to look at, perhaps that is a way of just diverting people's attention away from the true purpose of the place. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
It feels like a strategy.
I think it would be a handy strategy, to be completely honest with you, because the more that people focus on this over here that's not actually happening in their opinion, the less that they focus on this over there, which may well be happening. Satellite images, pilot photographs, internet investigators sourcing the scene have all tried and all failed to ever locate S4. And no one's ever come forward saying they were there or that it existed. I'm going to be honest, I don't really believe that S4 did exist, to be honest with you. However, I'm not ruling out any possibilities here. That's just my chain of thought. Could S4 have relocated? Could the coordinates that people have looked at been wrong? Or could every single other person that was there have been sworn to secrecy, never to give away any of their information? I think that the more you look into Area 51 and another key incident that we're going to get onto, the more you could say that people being sworn to secrecy would definitely be a thing. Not only that though, Bob Lazar's accounts on his education and where he had previously worked didn't quite match up to record. He claimed to have held a master's degree in physics from MIT and electronic technology from Caltech, but both MIT and Caltech have zero records of him ever attending, graduating, or being on campus. He claims he was hired as a staff physicist at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, but their records show that he never worked there. He was a data technician for an outside contractor, Kirk Myers. But to this day, he still doubles down on most of his claims. He's been on some major platforms like the Joe Rogan Experience, as well as multiple TV shows. And a lot of people will draw reference to the fact that when Bob Lazar first spoke about Area 51, this was before the government had even really admitted to Area 51 and what was going on there. And therefore, a lot of people say that Bob Lazar's claims did start to come true over time. And therefore, if you give this more time, then maybe it could. And over the years, Area 51 secrecy very much remained a thing, but here's the things that we do know. In 1994, there was a toxic waste lawsuit, and this was when former Area 51 workers tried to sue the government, basically, from all getting ill, some people falling seriously ill, some people passing away, and this was apparently from burning stealth coating in open pits and therefore inhaling toxic fumes. And this was really, really complicated because, as I say, people were sworn to secrecy. The government's work was so secret that when these men fell ill, the government weren't always willing to actually give them the details of what had caused it, or what at least they were burning in those pits to be able to cause it, and therefore they weren't able to give their doctors the details that may have really helped their conditions. But the following year, President Bill Clinton would sign an absolute secrecy mandate which prevented any information coming out, but did somewhat acknowledge that there was a place that many people had still thought was mythical, fictional, and that place was actually referred to as the Air Force's operation location near Groom Lake, Nevada, rather than Area 51 as we know it now. The Environmental Protection Agency, under heavy surveillance and stuff like that, were secretly allowed to go in there and to conduct some tests, which I believe Area 51 passed. But it was all basically kept very hush-hush in order to block that lawsuit and any future ones that could come their way. And at least 2 workers in Wally Kazar and Robert Frost died from liver and kidney failures, while dozens of others suffered severe skin, lung and organ damage. So quite the tragic scandal, really, and a move that would only build more intrigue into Area 51. A couple of years later, they actually expanded by seizing around 4,000 acres of land around Area 51, which means that Area 51 is actually a similar size, Josh, you might not know this, to Detroit in America.
That is a huge city in America. So That is massive. I can't believe it's that big, to be fair.
In 2003, we got some satellite images that showed the expansion of the area. And by the mid-2000s, Area 51 became the classified area for drone testing, something that obviously has now made its way into warfare. And in 2015, nearly 25 years since Bob Lazar's original claims about Area 51 and S4, the CIA basically finally admitted that Area 51 was a place. They denied that S4 was a place, and they stuck with the official story that Area 51 was there for testing sort of fighter planes, weapons, anything like that the Americans didn't want other countries to have knowledge on. In 2019, there was a Facebook page formed, and it was simply called Storm Area 51. It was for people that basically wanted answers, wanted to take it into their own hands, and there were 2 million people that joined this Facebook group. There definitely wouldn't have been 2 million people that tried to storm Area 51, and for the people that were serious about it, they were probably met with a quite firm stance from the CIA, from the American government, and that was basically that they wouldn't take any pity onto people trespassing onto an area which, let's be honest, is shrouded in secrecy, in the Americans' opinions, for good reason, and I think that put off any Storm Area 51 incentivization. Then in 2023, a man named David Grush, a former US Air Force officer and intelligence official, came out and testified under oath that the US government had recovered both intact and partially intact craft of non-human origin. When asked if the government possessed the pilots of these crafts, he stated that non-human biologics were recovered along with the wreckage. The thing is, though, a little bit like Bob Lazar, David Grush admitted to have never actually seen any of the extraterrestrial life form himself, and he was actually going on witness accounts that couldn't actually be validated at the time. And both NASA and the Pentagon came out and firmly denied this. It would be around this time, though, that NASA did come out and confirm that they were looking in to UAPs, which stands for Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. Basically, they renamed UFOs, didn't they, to just make it sound a little bit less creepy or something like that, and maybe to downplay the fact that ultimately NASA were saying that they were looking into UFOs. However, they did say whatever they were looking into definitely wasn't connected to extraterrestrial life. So, Josh, that's pretty much what I have up to date on Area 51. Do you believe Bob Lazar's claims about Area 51?
I don't think there's any real evidence beyond one man's testimony to say that this location is like a warehouse of alien craft or basically houses any other sort of extraterrestrial beings. And this is why I wanted to talk about it right at the start of this episode, because what we're talking about with Area 51, with Roswell, with lots of other things that we're going to get onto on this episode is the sort of like the start of the UFO craze, the reason why we care so much about it. Like when you talk about Area 51 to anyone, they'll know it's to do with aliens. There's some weird stuff going down there, and it's something that people desperately wanted to analyze and investigate. And that's why 2 million people did sign that Facebook thing. I remember seeing that, and I remember thinking, those guys, if they go to an American military base, bad stuff is going to happen to them. So I remember that. So the fact that that's happening in 2019 is absolutely terrifying. But to answer your question, I don't necessarily refute Bob Lazar's claims. And what I also now want to go into is some other potential hoaxes, people that have claimed that they've seen aliens, but we know that that information is false, before I start telling you about tangible cases where people have come into contact with aliens, and we're going to go from there. So can I just first of all tell you a little bit about the Alien Autopsy case?
I would love to hear about that case.
Right, we talked about some alien craft on this episode, but what if I told you that some vehicles here on Earth might be able to make you some money?
What sort of vehicles and how much money?
Well, let me tell you all about Refund Club. Because if you've had car finance between 2007 and 2022, you could be owed a bit of cash. And that's because car finance was missold because of hidden commission agreements between lenders and dealerships. And because of that, it's estimated that about £8.2 billion is due to British motorists. And the best thing about this is that it's super simple. Now, you could spend hours trying to go through your old agreements, trying to find the contracts, trying to do all the legwork. But what you really should do is take the easy path. And all you need to do, therefore, is hit up Refund Club using the link in the description below. And then you just complete a form. It took me 60 seconds when I checked it out for myself, because all you need to do is put your name and your date of birth in, and they will do all of the legwork for you from there. They'll find all of your previous agreements and check whether you could have a valid claim. If you do, you'll be passed over to their in-house legal team, and it's a no-win, no-fee basis case. So you'll only pay if your claim is successful. And something which is definitely worth knowing is that you can actually do multiple claims if you've had multiple instances of car finance. And the FCA estimates that the average claim to each British motorist could be up to £829 per agreement. So if you had multiple, that really does add up. And you'll be in good hands because Refund Club have an excellent rating on Trustpilot. So remember, if you have had car finance between 2007 and 2021, then hit the link in the description below or use the QR code on screen right now and check out Refund Club. Thank you so much to them for supporting this episode. Now let's get back to the aliens. So, Joey, I'm sure you remember this. There was some black and white footage. There were aliens. There were men in white coats. They were investigating these, I think, passed away alien creatures. And it was footage that, I mean, look, there were standard alien looking things, weren't there? They were sort of like little grey men. They had big heads. They had weird eyes. Yeah. There was weird stuff going on. But it looked, that footage, when you first saw it, you were like, that's serious. That could easily been in Area 51. And that's why we're talking about it, right?
And I think you have to kind of put yourself in a time machine to a certain extent and realize that when people saw this sort of footage, this is before the days of AI. This is before the days where you had become accustomed to seeing things and understanding that it probably wasn't true. And therefore, even if you had showed someone like an AI image back in those days that wasn't, hadn't been made at that point, they would definitely be believing what they had seen there. So I very much think you do have to regress yourself to a certain degree and then ask yourself the question, would you believe what you had seen on that tape? And the answer is a lot of people did.
And this is the thing, because it happened in our lifetime. A film was made with Ant and Dec, two, I would say, of the most popular celebrities at the time in the UK. A huge film that a lot of us went and saw. And that film told the story of a man called Ray Santilli. So can I tell you a little bit more about him?
I'd love to hear a bit more about him. And I don't think that this story is going to actually take us too far from where we're sat right now.
Well, let's go back to 1993 when Ray Santilli, a British music producer, comes in to this story. He was traveling to the United States, basically looking for some vintage footage of Elvis Presley. Ray then tells a story that he met a retired US military cameraman, and they get talking on various different topics. Obviously, he's talking about music at the start. He's talking about Elvis. He's asking him if he's seen any footage, but they actually end up starting to talk about Roswell, and they also start talking about alien beings. And so the story goes, this chap says to Ray that I filmed something in 1947 that no one was ever meant to see. And Ray's obviously massively intrigued at this point, and he begs the cameraman to basically show him the footage. And we've described it already. What he sees is absolutely shocking. And so what do you do if you've seen footage of alien creatures on a television screen? Well, the immediate thing you do is offer tens of thousands of dollars for that footage with the potential of monetary gain. Ray takes the footage home and meets up with his business partner, Gary Shoefield, and they end up selling the rights to this footage all over the world. And in August of 1995, Fox broadcast a special called Alien Autopsy, Fact or Fiction. And this was hosted by a Star Trek star called Jonathan Frakes, who many people knew from a series which is pretty much all about aliens, let's be honest. It's a fictional creation, but at the time, it was absolutely massive. Star Trek, huge. That special attracted over 12 million viewers, and that footage became etched in the minds of so many overnight as a result. The images also aired to over 30 other countries, and everybody believed that this was the first real proof that otherworldly beings were real and they'd visited Earth. And for years after that, as a result, Ray got a lot of unwanted attention because although I've said a lot of people believed it, a lot of people also thought immediately that this was a fake. People were really skeptical about the ways that the doctors actually handled these creatures because they didn't know whether they would have unknown pathogens or unearthly biology. And apparently the procedures didn't even marry up to autopsies that were going on at the time. And instruments in the footage were also from completely different time periods, so it just made no sense. And the film canisters themselves held labels from the Department of Defense, an agency that wasn't even named that until after 1947, the time in which the cameraman said the footage was actually from. And speaking of that cameraman, a lot of people tried to track him down in the years after the film was actually released. And Ray never named him. He never divulged where he actually met him, and he never divulged where he was at this point. And basically, that cameraman has never been found. But Ray denied that the films were a fake, and he kept up this story for years and years after. And he even said that he sent the films to be identified and actually sent for testing to prove that they were from the time period that he said. But it later came out that he actually never even did that. And I think what's most apparent is that Ray was an unbelievable storyteller and he had millions of people still convinced. And that was until 2006 when Joey is sat in his front room, he loads a DVD up and it's called Alien Autopsy, and he watches Anton Deck tell him what actually happened. So in that film, Joey, you'll remember that Ray says that the story was genuine. He met up with the cameraman, he got the footage. He tries to play that footage, but it had been so degraded that he wasn't able to reproduce it. He wasn't able to share it, and it was basically very difficult to show it.
He said it was non-viewable.
Exactly.
At that point.
So he's seen the footage. It's much like the moon landings. Perhaps we'll have to do a video on the moon landings, Joey, one day. But maybe, therefore, he had to recreate that footage and show the people of the world what he had seen without being able to replicate the film reels. It does sound a little bit far-fetched at this point. So this is what Ray did. He went to an empty living room of a friend in Camden and then posed an alien made from hollow plaster. And that, in fact, was created by a man called John Humphreys that was a sculptor who worked on Doctor Who. So probably had a lot of experience in creating alien creatures, I would say. The organs were from a local butcher that were inside that plaster cast. And the blood of the creature was actually what, Joey? Have a guess? It was I'm
going to say some sort of soup, tomato soup.
Very close. It was raspberry jam.
Right.
So you're not too far off there. And after they finished filming, they cut that dummy up into various different pieces and just put it in bins all around London. That
would have been pleasant, wouldn't it? You go down, put your shopping down to the bin. Oh, there's an alien in there.
Yeah, exactly. Little alien heads being found. That would be really concerning, to be fair. And even though this was clearly a hoax and clearly a fake, and Ray actually comes out and admitted it, Ray and Gary actually did very well out of this. First of all, they made millions of pounds selling the broadcasting rights. And there also wasn't really a whole lot of embarrassment because in the movie themselves, they explained exactly what happened and that they'd fooled everyone. But what this did mean is that every subsequent piece of video footage, especially in the modern era, it was treated with intense pessimism. And because of the popularity that Ray and Gary saw, it sparked a whole new wave of alien hoaxes that we saw for years and years after this. One of them was the alien mummies that were found in 2017. Do you remember this like image that they found?
I've got a picture in my head.
Like imagine like almost like mummified aliens, really, really small beings. And they basically showed footage of this. They got them DNA tested and said that they were completely real. This is, as I say, in 2017. The DNA tests come back. Perhaps something even weirder happened. It came back that they were human. And they were like really, I don't know, like shrunken head kind of things. I don't know if you've ever seen those shrunken heads. Like basically, again, you can shrink heads down. They become like an eighth of their size. And that's what I think these mummies actually were.
And what is the purpose for doing that?
Shrinking the human beings?
Yeah.
I think it was like a burial thing that they used to do in different cultures all around the world, basically. Very, very strange. But then there was this whole craze that the mummies were actually cake. Don't know if you ever remember this. Like they ended up cutting up these mummies in basically like a fake, it wasn't an AI video at the time, but a fake video. And that was then cake. So again, that was another example of these alien hoax, but people thought they were very real. And by the way, the footage is on screen right now. They looked alien. They looked very strange. They definitely didn't look human. And then you've got various other cases, including Twin Falls, Aztec, New Mexico, the Billy Meier photographs, and tens of others that were later found to be false claims. And as I say, this was the age of myths, people coming up with falsehoods and saying that they'd seen aliens when that wasn't the case. And that's where many people might end an episode like this, saying that there isn't really any proof that aliens have set foot on Earth. But that is not the case for us, because the next section is all about eyewitnesses that have seen alien beings themselves. They've stuck their neck on the line and throughout time have consistently said that they have seen UFOs and they believe that they are real. So we've talked about Alien Autopsy, a hoax that we know isn't real, but why don't we go back to the actual foundation of that alien autopsy, which is in Roswell, the United States.
Yeah, well, if anyone's ever looked into the Roswell incident, I think that one thing that none of us can deny is something definitely happened there. Just what that was, we're not quite sure, and we'll get into it now. And the funny thing about the Roswell incident is it didn't actually happen in Roswell. It happened about 75 miles away in a place called Foster Ranch, and that was near a place called Corona in New Mexico. And it all started one day when a rancher called Mac Brazel goes out and he's walking around and he basically finds a huge debris field. On that debris field, amongst more things, he states that he finds rubber strips that are smoke grey in colour, tinfoil, a rather tough paper, small wooden sticks, and tape with what looked like a floral pattern printed on it. And this isn't the first time that Mac Brazel has found debris in some of the fields around the ranch, but this is definitely the first time he's found anything that he sees as suspicious, especially after talking to a few people and bouncing it off of them, saying, you know, does this look normal to you? And eventually he decides to get a box to gather as much of it as he possibly can, and then to drive around 75 miles to the sheriff's office in Roswell. Now, I found various accounts since that have said that Mac Brazel never actually theorized what it could be at the sheriff's office. However, initially, it was portrayed as if he did. The sheriff immediately alerts the RAAF, the Roswell Army Airfield, and that's when intelligence officer Major Jesse Marcel and Captain Sheridan Cavett travel back with Mac Brazel to the Foster Ranch. They apparently stay the night, collect debris, analyze it, and then by the following day, they issue a statement. That statement originated from a military base, but by the time it reached the Roswell Daily Record, the headline, printed on July the 8th, read, RAAF captures flying saucer on a ranch in Roswell region. But hours after that story was printed, some high-ranking military officials were said to have stepped in. This included Brigadier General Roger Ramey. They go to the ranch and they have a completely different opinion of the first men that were sent there. They basically conclude that the flying disc wasn't a flying disc, and it was actually just debris from a weather balloon and a radar reflector. Ramsey straight away orders a retraction of the previous day's statement to the press, and I believe that he actually kind of put some of his workers under fire, basically saying that it was very clear what it was. They had come across stuff like this before, and they should have been able to tell that. The thing is, the figures we're actually talking about here, Josh, they're very senior, aren't they? It's not like they were on work experience sent to that field, is it?
Yeah, 100%. And this is why it does feel a little bit strange. It does feel like a gagging order almost, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's when reporters actually come into the office of General Ramsey. They come there to photograph Major Marcel actually holding up the debris, and they pretty much felt that that would cement what they had said in terms of, look, it's nothing out of the ordinary. It's a weather balloon. The next day, the newspapers run with the headline of General Ramsey empties Roswell saucer. Basically, they're saying, it's a mistake. Sorry for getting you guys worried. I know it's a pretty big deal to claim that we found a flying saucer, but don't worry, it isn't really our fault. Actually, it's kind of Mac Brazel's fault, isn't it? He was the one that came to us and claimed it was that, and we just kind of went along with it. Or that was the gist it kind of gave off. Mac Brazel, under immense pressure and scrutiny, was, in many people's opinions, forced in to basically retract his statement and to apologise, which I do find quite crazy, Josh, considering that he was reluctant in saying that he never claimed that it was a flying saucer himself. During that time, they also allegedly forced him to go and sit down on local radio and to give an interview about the incident. And in the years after, there were a lot of people that worked at that radio that said that he was basically reading from a script. He was very distressed. He wasn't being treated very well at the time, and maybe they doubted the validity of his subsequent claims. Mac's family said the pressure was immense and really took a toll on him. I even read somewhere that he, in the aftermath, had said, unless I find a bomb, I won't be giving anything to the Roswell Sheriff's Office in future. And he actually claimed that he had twice before found weather balloons or hot air balloons on the ranch, and this looked nothing like them. But it did kind of look like many people had bought the weather balloon theory for quite a few years after that. And this actually carried on all the way until eventually, years later, someone would track down Jesse Marcel and he would make some claims that would blow people's minds. He basically said that the US had covered it up. And what he found initially that day when he was the first one to go to the scene with Mac Brazel, he claimed it was non-human. His actual quote said it was not from this earth. He said that the sort of shiny metal-like sheets that he was photoed with weren't the same as the sheets that he found at the scene. And obviously, at the scene, he did various sort of testing on it that you can do outside of a lab, such as physically. He said that it was like tinfoil, almost. So, to his great surprise, he had never found any material similar to this. There were some parts of it that he was able to scrunch up into a ball, in his words, and once he did that, it would immediately return to its original state. He said that there were some parts that, although were paper thin like tinfoil, were completely unbreakable and unbendable. He said that you could have took a sledgehammer to those parts and it wouldn't have worked. And not only that, he had tried to set parts of it on fire and it wasn't flammable. What else wasn't flammable was the wooden-like materials that he claimed to have found there. He claimed that he tried to set them on fire and it wouldn't work. He also said that some of the beams had strange symbols on them. Symbols that almost matched up to Egyptian markings. Here's an exact quote from him. "I knew I had never seen anything like that before. I was pretty well acquainted with anything that flew or air-related materials, and this was nothing like that. They wanted to keep this one on the down low. They wanted to keep it covered up." So now we have potential UFOs in the question. But did he actually claim, or did Mac Brazel actually claim, to have seen any aliens themselves? No, they didn't. But but that doesn't mean that no one did. There was a civil engineer named Barry Barnett who claimed that he saw a separate UFO, and he described several dead, small humanoid creatures with large heads inside. Then we have Glenn Dennis. He was a mortician that worked in a funeral parlor, and he recalled being asked for small sealed caskets. He says that it was the RAAF base that requested them, and upon dropping them there, he said that they were asking him for information on basically how to preserve what was put inside the caskets. But he also claimed to have seen a lot more at that RAAF base. And when he visited, he said that he actually visited the RAAF base hospital, and at the hospital, he was shocked at what he saw. This included military ambulances containing large, unusual objects shaped like half canoes. He also said that these objects had writing on them that were similar to ancient Egyptian markings. He then claims to have met a hysterical nurse. She confided in him, allegedly, and said that she helped two doctors basically do an autopsy on some non-human beings. She said there was 3 of them, with 2 of their bodies being really mangled up as if they had been in some sort of car crash, whereas 1 of them was in decent condition. She said that they had bulbous heads, slits for eyes, hard cartilage instead of bones, and claimed that the stench that came from their bodies was so bad that the doctors had to take multiple breaks to be able to basically compose themselves in between the examination. So definitely, Josh, not the smell of raspberry jam.
No, it's definitely not raspberry jam now, but it's so interesting that we're talking about that in this particular moment, because this is what set off Ray Santilli to make his hoax video. But this is the real life interpretation of those events. Like, this could easily have been the cameraman's footage from 1947 about what he saw. The description is very similar, is it not?
It is very, very similar. The problem is the description of this woman wasn't all that similar to anything that anyone knew. And he actually said that this woman shortly after was transferred. She was apparently transferred to England. And according to him, he heard that she apparently died in some sort of plane crash. No record backed up the nurse's claims, and no record showed a nurse that was transferred to England or died in that way. However, you know, if you err on the side of belief, then you would say that there's probably not going to be a record for that. 2 men called Gerald Anderson and Jim Ragsdale came out in the early 90s claiming to have seen a flying disc crash when they were younger. They also claimed to have seen non-human creatures which allegedly matched up with the nurse's descriptions. And although there are claims all over the world of this sort of nature, what was striking was that a lot of these claims were coming out in a smallish area in the grand scale of things, and a lot of them had so many similarities. Saying that, however, one thing that I will say is when you're in a small area, sometimes sort of folklore and rumours can run away like wildfire. Sometimes people are bored. They haven't got much to do, and therefore it can become a thing where people believe what they want to believe at times. So I'm not denying any of the claims here, but I'm also trying to paint the other side and show that sometimes there are sort of wives' tales that get carried away. But if they were lying, then how do you explain the 1997 Roswell report, which actually came out and breathed air upon these theories and gave a conclusion as to why people may have found that they saw non-human creatures? The report said that the people that thought they saw alien-like creatures probably did, but they were actually test dummies that were in quite bad condition after being dropped from high altitude. Why in 1947, or starting in 1947, Josh, do you think that we'd be experimenting with what happens when you drop someone from altitude? I thought we would have sort of made our minds up on that. I
mean, to be honest with you as well, it just doesn't really make sense. Like, to say that you've seen an alien being, I mean, you can quite clearly see a crash dummy as a crash dummy. And also like a mannequin, like people in 1947 have seen mannequins. Like a crash dummy isn't that dissimilar from a mannequin, is it really?
Well, there's another problem with the report though. All of the claims, or some of the claims at least, that I've given you stretch all the way back to 1947. But they said that this sort of thing that they were doing where they were dropping the test dummies started in 1950. So
that doesn't make any sense.
Were the test dummies just on the ground in between them for 3 years for people to just start seeing them and mistake them very distinctly for non-human creatures? Now, they admitted in that report to covering up the initial crash. But what they said was that sort of weather balloon did look a little bit different, and that's because it was actually a spy balloon. It was one that was going up into the sky and actually getting information about sort of testing that they believed were coming from other parts of the world to prepare for attacks and wars and things like that. So what do you make of that conclusion, Josh? Do
you know what really annoys me? The whole weather balloon thing. Because I think the people around us really do think we're stupid. Because in what world does a weather balloon, I suppose like a latex-based object which is full of air, which isn't metallic, look anything like a flying saucer?
I don't think it's anything like a flying saucer.
It's like a completely different shape.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, like I say, Mac Brazel had said, I'd found 2 weather balloons on the ranch. Yeah. Like, it wasn't that uncommon type thing. Therefore, maybe because discoveries have been made, they thought that weather balloons would be the logical option to go with if we're casting doubt and judgment upon what they said. Not only that, there were multiple people that actually claimed to have seen the crash. Most of these people claim to have seen it as kids and stuff like that. And again, meteorites were kind of they could be a thing. They could be a thing, and they were kind of used as an excuse here. But yeah, there were people that said that they saw a sort of disc fly, crash into Earth, and then almost rebound off instead of crashing, which is not anything like we would see with any of our sort of aircrafts or anything like that. Definitely not of a weather balloon. Rebound off and actually then travel for miles and miles before crashing again. There are sites that have been examined, but again, they've been put down to meteorites. So yeah, there's a lot of disputing these claims, but I do think when I compare it to the research I did on Area 51, I think there's a lot of differences. Yeah, this is the thing. Like, certainly there are elements of this story which feel otherworldly. I mean, the caskets, the sort of sealed element of it, the potential of these, the doctors and nurses becoming ill or disappearing. There's stuff that just doesn't add up from that perspective. And this is why I wanted to cover that at this point in the case, because what we've done is we've discovered the hoaxes, we've discovered the falses, we've discovered why UFOs are even in the popular consciousness of culture right now. But what I now want to go into is other occurrences where witnesses have not only seen something, but they've been able to describe it. And it's not just like it's 1 or 2 people, Joey. It's tens of people that have all seen the same thing, and no one can understand or explain what they've seen. So I want to first tell you, Joey, about the Westhall School incident. Now, the 2 examples that I'm going to go through are both schools, which is also a little bit strange when you think about it. But this happened on the morning of the 6th of April, 1966. Have you heard about this? I haven't actually heard much about this. I'm really interested to learn it. So we've got to go all the way to Australia, and it's a quiet suburb of Melbourne called Clayton South. And the day was beginning like any other. And there was a school in this suburb, as I say, called Westhall High. And it was surrounded by a lot of open areas, fields, that sort of thing. And also an area which is sort of like half forest, half field, called the Grange. And basically what would happen at lunchtime or break time is the kids would go out from this school and go towards the fields and go towards the Grange and basically play outside and do what they were doing at break time. And on the 6th of April, at around 11 a.m., the kids do just that. They go outside for their break. And suddenly, there is a huge commotion, and several of the pupils see something incredibly unusual. They say that there was a grey or silvery object flying directly and silently above the school. They say that it was slightly larger than the size of a family car, and that it had no visible engines, it had no wings, no windows, or anything that would make it look like a traditional human-made craft. The kids and the teachers, by the way, all saw this craft head towards the school. It hovered over it, and then it moved erratically in the sky. Eventually, some kids saw that it had actually touched down in the Grange, and it stayed there for several
minutes. Shortly after that, it rose vertically and very quickly it accelerated towards the northwest and out of sight of the children and the teachers. And the kids then run over to the Grange and they find an 8-meter circle pretty much of the grassy area and find that had been squashed down, but also some of it had actually been burnt. And what's the most fascinating thing about this is that you've got between 200 and 300 people that all witnessed this event independently and all confirmed a very similar story. And while you can question like the kids' perception of reality and what they've seen, do you know what I mean? Like when you're a child, like sometimes you misremember things and you can't adequately explain sometimes what you've seen. You can't do that for all the teachers involved. And there were other witnesses as well. So basically drivers and passers-by all saw very similar things and they were very concerned by what they saw and they refuted that information to the people that asked about it. Now, within hours, you had police, you had military personnel, and you had lots of other investigators all descend upon that school very quickly. And much like in Roswell, there was a media gag order. So basically straight away, the press weren't able to go to the site. They definitely weren't able to talk about it.
How do you gag kids? Like,
it just doesn't, mate. It's just weird, isn't it? Well, you can't.
It just makes you even more suspicious.
Yeah.
Though.
And also 200 to 300 people, you can't really stop them from talking. It's impossible. And then also a really strange part of this is apparently men in some suits came up to one of the teachers, a science teacher, and started intimidating him and sort of saying, are you sure you saw what you say you did? And are you going to talk about it? What are you going to do with this information? And again, almost like straight away, you had this aura of intimidation and people saying, be quiet, don't talk about this.
There's just common trends in all of these stories that just start to seem to add up, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. And not only that, there was a student that had a camera. The military men confiscated that camera straight away. So again, what proof was there? What photographic proof was there on that camera that we've never seen as a result? And afterwards, the authorities speak to the world, the public, the Australian locals that were there. And guess what they said that they'd found on the site, Joey?
Don't tell me a fucking weather balloon.
It was a weather balloon.
Fuck
Every
off. I'm not having
single
it.
flying saucer incident obviously is attributed to a weather balloon. What a surprise. And again, Joey, a weather balloon is metallic in orientation, isn't it? It moves erratically and incredibly quickly, and it leaves a scorched earth mark on the floor as it then goes up to the heavens.
And as well consists of sort of non-human made materials. But yeah. That's what I know weather balloons as.
It's obviously a weather balloon. Yeah. Like, let's not even think about this anymore. And still, to this day, we don't know what happened in 1966. They've never been able to find the craft. They've never been able to find any other information. They haven't released any film or photographic evidence. So we still don't know what happened. But there was also another school incident that happened much closer to the present day that shared a lot of commonalities with the story that I've just told. And this happened at the Ariel School in Zimbabwe in 1994. Ariel School was a private primary school in Ruwa, around 14 miles east of Harare in Zimbabwe. And the date was September the 16th, as I say, 1994. 2 days earlier, a huge fireball was seen across the sky in the entirety of southern Africa. Now, people had suggested that this could have been a meteor, and by all accounts, it sounds like it absolutely could have been. But what it meant was that people were looking up into the skies more so than they may have done otherwise. So let's get back to the day in question. It was 11:15 a.m. and much like the previous school incident, the kids were going out for their break time. But this time, the teachers were inside the school because they were having a staff meeting. And so the kids were just able to go and play outside by themselves. And just like Westhall, they see a shiny silver object. It was a disc. It was silvery or metallic. It was hovering silently. It was reflecting the sunlight. And there were also some other smaller crafts hovering over the trees. And just like in Westhall, the object touches down. The thing is, this time, this craft didn't just stay there and disappear. It waited a lot more time, and also some very strange things happened. Because about 60 to 70 kids gather around the flying saucer. Let's just call it a flying saucer for now, right? This disc-shaped object. And they saw some small figures emerging from the craft. And their descriptions of these beings were all remarkably similar. They were around 1 meter tall. They were dressed in tight-fitting black suits. They had disproportionately large heads, large black eyes, no hair, and they were gliding around rather than using legs to walk. And then the kids started to feel something strange. Not all of them, but some of them felt that they were interpreting ideas that they'd never heard before, almost like they were being communicated with via these creatures.
Do you mean like mind manipulation, you saying?
Well, I think it's more communication, but not using words. Like, as in, like, I'm, telepathy, basically, pretty much.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just one or two of the kids that said this, by the way. This was several kids that were then questioned and interviewed afterwards. And they all said very similar things. These aliens were communicating with them. They were saying that the Earth has become too technologically advanced, that humankind was causing harm to the Earth, and they needed to stop doing that if they wanted the Earth to survive.
This is fucking mental.
And so after that, what must have been a quite traumatic event for a lot of the children, and after several minutes, the craft and the creatures enter into it, the craft hovers up, and then again, very quickly, it moves away. The kids run back into their school and tell their teachers, who obviously thought that they were playing like a prank or something. They didn't believe them. But as they talked to more and more of the students, they realized that independently, all of their stories kind of added up and they weren't dissimilar from each other. And then parents came to pick up their children and learn what happened as well. And news quickly spread and went through the entire country and also the entire world. And so what happens next is a UFO researcher called Cynthia Hind attends the school. She interviews all of the kids independently, and not only that, she asked them to draw what they saw. And all of these drawings come back with a striking consistency. But it wasn't just Cynthia that attended the school, because a couple of months later, another doctor attended. His name was Dr. John E. Mack, and he was a Pulitzer Prize winning professor of psychiatry from Harvard Medical School. He flew all the way to Zimbabwe to interview the children, and his expertise is on trauma and the human experience of dealing with that. So he was a very credible person to actually go and interview the children and ascertain if they were telling the truth. And what he found was that a lot of the children were showing signs of emotional distress. He famously stated that the children were not fabricating their story, nor were they suffering from a collective hysteria. They were all describing a physical reality of an experience that they had all had firsthand. And ever since this incident, Ariel School has become a defining pillar of what we basically describe as UFOs. Now they've rebranded to UAPs. I don't know what they're going to be called next, Joe, but they're going to keep going. And that's because of a few reasons. The kids' stories, as I say, really do add up. The witnesses weren't really exposed to UFO pop culture in the same way like you or I or an American audience would have been. Like, they wouldn't have seen all of these films. They would have been engrossed in it in the same way we had. And they certainly wouldn't have heard of all the stories like Roswell and that sort of thing within the alien world that we've described so far in this episode. And all of them are now grown up and they still stick to their story to this day. And because academics like Cynthia and John Mack independently studied them, it feels impossible to say that this experience wasn't real. But as you can understand, the difficulty with all of these cases that we've mentioned thus far in this part of the episode is that they're all relying on witnesses. And we've seen in various other cases that we've done on this channel that witness information can be fallible and it's very difficult to refute all of them. Now, the caveat to that is we're talking about several hundred people in the first case that I mentioned, 60 to 70 children in the second case. So it doesn't really add up that they would be lying. But why don't we go to the next section of the episode where we describe cases with tangible proof. And the case that I have to talk about next is the USS Nimitz. Joey, have you seen some footage that is black and white taken from a aircraft of a sort of like tic-tac looking thing that you haven't been able to explain?
Yes, I've seen that before. That
is from this case, and I'm going to tell you all about why this is certainly not a human craft that is a weather balloon or is something that could be some spy technology, because it isn't.
This was one that was kind of basically flying in line with the aircraft, isn't it?
Let me go into it. So we're going back to mid-November 2004. There is a nuclear aircraft carrier called the USS Nimitz and a guided missile cruiser called the USS Princeton. And they were doing a training exercise roughly about 50 to 120 miles away from San Diego, California. And they were doing that training exercise because they were very soon after going to the Persian Gulf to actually do some live military work. And on November the 10th, some radar operators on the USS Princeton were carrying out some setup work. Basically, they had changed their radar systems and they had upgraded it to a newer version. And what they saw on the radar systems when they booted them up was potentially some anomalies, something that they couldn't really understand and something that they found very strange. There were 10 to 20 objects drifting south at about 100 knots. And soon after they were first seen, they made movements that defied the laws of physics. They would hover at around 80,000 feet, like basically on the edge of space pretty much, and then descend all the way to 20,000 feet in the matter of seconds. Now, no human craft, in fact, no object that was just free falling straight down would be able to make that maneuver that quickly. So it was quite obvious that there was either a huge radar malfunction or something alien was spotted on the screen. So they do what anyone would do in this situation. They try and turn the system off and on again. They try to reset it to show that it was clearly a mistake. But what happened when they turned the radar back on is that the objects not only reappeared, but reappeared even more clearly than they had done previously. And so on the morning of the 14th of November, 2004, under perfect weather conditions with exceptionally calm, glassy seas, several aircraft were launched into the operating area. Lieutenant Colonel Douglas Kurth launched from his fighter jet on a routine flight, and he was told to check out something strange. But the colonel couldn't see anything on his radar, but he did peer out from the cockpit and see below there was a round, frothing, circular disturbance on the surface of the water, which was about 50 to 100 meters wide, that resembled a shoal or rapidly sinking ship. Shortly after, at around 1:30 p.m, there were two other fighter pilots that were sent out to check this out. They were called Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slight. And they reached the target area around 20,000 feet, and they also looked down into the sea and saw that disturbance on the surface of the water. But this time they saw something else. Hovering above the water was a smooth, uniformly white, oblong capsule-shaped object, roughly 40 to 46 feet long. This is what they've described as that sort of tic-tac shape thing, basically, right? It's sort of like a white object, looks just like a tic-tac, like imagine that, but the tic-tac is 40 to 46 feet long. It's a huge thing.
It's a huge tic-tac, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It had no wings, it had no rotors, no exhaust, and was moving erratically like a ping pong ball. So basically what happens then is that Fravor takes his fighter jet and does like a spiral down. Like basically you don't want to go straight down sometimes, you want to spiral down so you control, but also so you can track the object as you're going down. That's the footage that you kind of described so far, that movement where they're sort of trying to track the object. And as he gets closer and closer, he starts seeing the object up close, or as close as he's got so far. But as he does this, the object mirrors his movement. And basically on the other side of the spiral, he's doing the exact same movement, this alien craft. And then as Fravor cut the circle to intercept, the object accelerated at a multi-Mach speed, pretty much something that we've never seen on planet Earth, right, by human craft. And it disappeared out of sight in a split second. Then the Princeton radios back into Fravor and they have a conversation like, what's happened? Like, where is this thing that I was tracking? And it had moved 60 miles away in a matter of seconds. So there's no way that anything human could have done that. Like, we just don't have the propulsion technology to go 60 miles in a matter of seconds. But then those two fighter planes were running out of fuel, so they got sent back to base, and then two more planes get sent out to sort of try and ascertain what had happened. And this is where we see Lieutenant Chad Underwood recording the footage that we've all seen now. This is the stuff that's actually been released. Basically, those two guys didn't actually capture any footage. What we've heard is their witness testimony. This is where Chad Underwood actually records the footage of this tic-tac. Again, the thermal camera on this aircraft shows that there's no wings, no tails, no control surfaces, no hot exhaust plume that would indicate a conventional engine. The object remains relatively stable in the center of the display because the camera's tracking system and were actively working to keep it locked. However, at the very end of the video, the object suddenly darts off extremely rapidly to the left-hand side of the frame, exiting the screen. Underwood then flies back to the ship where he conducts a debrief with lots of other members of the ship itself. And they basically end up laughing at him and having a joke around and saying that this is obviously not an alien craft and that he's been made a fool. But they do find it a little bit strange as well. But what is really weird is even though they did do some sort of like informal chats on board the ship, he wasn't actually asked to do a formal interview about what he's seen. Indeed, it wasn't until 5 years later that he was asked to conduct a formal interview of what he'd seen. So then Commander Fravia copied the videotapes onto other sort of like recording devices on the ship. He wrapped them up and placed them inside a safe on the Nimitz. Then, very strangely, when he went back to check the tapes inside that safe a few days later, he saw they had been removed. And about 12 hours after the event, an unusual helicopter landed on the aircraft carrier. And inside that helicopter, some plainclothes civilians emerged and went onto the ship. When they did, they asked Petty Officer Gary Voorhees to hand over all cooperative engagement capability files, which basically compiled of the fleet's raw radar data, the communications, and all of the sensor tracking data. He was also instructed to delete all of the other tapes that had the records of what Chad Underwood had recorded. Now, bear in mind that this happened in 2004. It wasn't until 2007 that the public got wind of this footage because it was leaked on a forum. Now, on this forum, the person that posted the video was like a film school or something. So they immediately thought that this was a hoax. It was a load of rubbish and produced by someone at film school that wanted to make themselves famous, much like Ray. That's why we tell the story, right? But this wasn't fake, and this was real military footage. However, the footage didn't really gain mass market attention for 10 years. And it wasn't until a New York Times article in 2017 that it sort of emerged again and we started viewing it. And this is where you or I had seen the footage from this point on.
So it's the best part of 15 years almost after the event actually happened until it ended up really becoming sort of ingrained in people's consciousness.
This is the thing. And this is why people ask the question, what is going on out there that we have no idea about? Because again, so much of this is classified. It's not maybe even higher than classified because the military men don't even get to keep the source files. Like there's civilian plainclothes people that come onto that military base and go, we're taking those files, we're taking them away from you.
When those jets are, the planes are sort of circling around it and trying to be able to get a view of it, obviously nothing really came of it that we know of, right? I'd love to know what the secret sort of military operations that were set in place that day and that evening actually were. Because regardless of whether it was a UFO, whether it had aliens in it or whatever, or whether it was from this world or not, they clearly didn't know it was.
Do you know what the scariest thing
would have been?
Yeah, do you know what the scariest thing for those fighter pilots are? They didn't have any weapons on them. They were training. They were doing training, so they didn't have any live munitions on them.
They literally would have been shot down.
They were literally sitting ducks. If anything had happened, if that craft had fired upon them, they would have been screwed. So going back to the article, the New York Times published this on the front page and revealed the existence of the AATIP, which is the Pentagon's secret $22 million UFO study program initiated by former Senator Harry Reid. And again, while the New York Times have released this piece of information, it wasn't until 2020 that the US government acknowledged it and actually released it to the public, saying that it was military footage and actually sort of coming clean about what it was.
When you say coming clean about what it was, is that an admission that they didn't know what it was?
Well, this is the thing. What they've basically said in the statements afterwards, because the Pentagon actually did release a statement, is that they observed the aerial phenomenon and that the aerial phenomenon remain categorized as unidentified. So they're not saying that they know exactly what it is, but not knowing what something is as a military man is tantamount to saying it's alien.
Yeah, I get what you mean. It's difficult to irrefutably say that this isn't a secretive sort of aeroplane or something like that built in another country that could have the purposes of battle and war in mind and things like that. By the way, I'm just giving you the other side of the coin. I think it's probably aliens.
Yeah, you do. And this is the thing. Like, I think the thing for me is the movement of that craft is not possible for the level of human physics that we currently understand. So either someone has got some unbelievable breakthrough of science that we don't know about, or it is what we say it is.
Yeah, I've just had a look at the exact pattern of how it flew below the planes. And it's like you're drawing something. You're watching a plane going like that. And it's like I've got a pencil and just going, you know what I mean? It's the movement's mental.
Yeah. It's almost like, do you remember you had those scanners back in the day and they would sort of like, it was a beam of light that would go across a page and that was how it would pick it up. It was almost like that, but in like a more like juddery way, wasn't it? But it wasn't just that footage that was unearthed in the New York Times article, because there was another series of events that happened in 2014 and 2015 that was very similar in the style of footage and also released to the public at this time. Because in the summer of 2014 and March 2015, Navy pilots stationed on the aircraft carrier, the USS Theodore Roosevelt, experienced almost daily encounters with UAPs. Much like the Tic Tac capsule that Fravor encountered, the Roosevelt objects lacked wings, they had no flaps, they had no control surfaces, and crucially, infrared imaging on both incidents failed to detect any exhaust pipes, which meant that it couldn't have been an engine like we traditionally know in sort of modern aeronautics. This time, though, they described the craft as being slightly different. So one of the fighter pilots saw this being that they couldn't identify, and it was said to be a translucent cube, so like a grey cube, and inside of that was a circle. So again, it's not necessarily a Tic Tac shape, but sort of relatively similar, but just with a sort of like a shield around it this time. And again, it being a cube is very unlike any flying object that we have in Earth, because we have to have propulsion, wings. They're often very curved. If you think about aircrafts, there's very little sort of like cube-like surfaces.
Yeah, there's not much difference in most of them, to be honest. They pretty much look like aircrafts.
Exactly. And this is where we get two other bits of footage. The first one is called Gimbal. That was on the 20th of January 2015, and that was recorded off of Jacksonville in Florida. And this showed a wedge-shaped object that appeared to tilt and rotate while flying directly against a 120 knot westerly wind. The pilot's audio tracks was also captured in this footage, and the crew observed that there was a whole fleet of these objects on their tactical displays. The other image was from a clip called Go Fast, which was recorded in early 2015, and that was captured off the coast of Florida, which showed a small, bright object seemingly skimming at extreme speed across the ocean surface. And again, the Pentagon have come out after this and said that they still can't identify either of these objects. They don't know what it is. But all I know is that there's video proof out there of something that we can't explain. And so we get to the final chapter. We've established that there now is video evidence or proof that there's something that we can't explain. And so the last piece of the puzzle is the governments of this world coming out there and saying either aliens exist, or at least saying that there's objects in the night sky that we can't quite understand. And I didn't realize this until very recently, but there are governments out there that are doing this.
And who are they? Because I don't remember any of the English government coming out and saying this. I'd be doubtful of the US government with how the cover-ups have been in the past. So what governments have come out and said this?
So the answer is the US government. There was a 2021 congressional hearing that basically said that there were a series of unidentified events and that only a certain amount of them were able to be identified. They said that out of 144 incidents, 143 were still unexplained. To manage all of this mounting data, the Pentagon established the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which is now called the AARO, in 2022. This created a formal scientific framework to investigate inexplicable objects across the air, sea, and space, making a permanent end to decades of official silence and stigma. So that was in 2021. Now we've got to go back to 2023. And this is where we hear from a man that Joey's mentioned earlier in this this episode, David Grosh. So David is a former US Air Force intelligence officer, and he's also a member of the Pentagon's UAP task force. And in 2023, he testified under oath at a congressional hearing. And what he said was incredibly shocking for the rest of the world. David stated that the US government had been operating a multi-decade top secret crash retrieval and reverse engineering program possessing intact and partially intact craft of non-human origin.
How have they got them? Have they crashed? Have they recovered them from the air? How have they got them?
But this is the thing, like basically in that statement, he says that it was all from crash sites. So to go back to, like we talked about Roswell at the start of this episode, people made fun of that. People, again, intimidated the witnesses around there. People said that there's no way it could be that. People used the weather balloon excuse. You know, over and over again, there is a constant theme, isn't there, of people basically belittling witness testimony, saying that it's a load of rubbish, and playing it down, right? This guy, high-ranking official in the US military, under oath at a congressional hearing, you don't want to mess around in those sort of scenarios, do you? And he's saying what we all thought was true is true.
So why do you think it is that they crash? Do you think that it could be they're from another planet or something like that doesn't have gravity, and therefore when they come into our atmosphere, that's something that they haven't encountered before? Or do you think that they could be less civilized than us in a way, obviously more in the way that they're able to reach planet Earth, but, you know, in the way that we were apparently able to land on the moon, whether you believe it or not, you know, we were able to land. Do you think that that would be a suggestion that they're less civilized?
Well, I like to believe the theory that potentially a lot of these are drones. So, you know, again, we might not be seeing alien life on these craft, but there's certainly craft that have crashed. And again, what you said is an interesting point in that it's coming from another world. They haven't necessarily had to deal with Earth's gravity or Earth's, atmospheric compositions or whatever. Let's be honest, mate. If we're even trying to fathom going to another world, it's incredibly difficult. So even if you're a civilization with way more intelligence than we are and way more time than we've had, potentially it is still very difficult to come onto Earth and do it. And also, I personally subscribe to the belief that there's been lots of other craft that have very happily come to Earth, been very safe, and we're just hearing about the incidents where one or two of the craft have crashed. So I think it's more like that. Now, David also went on in the hearing to say that not only have they found craft, but they've also found non-human biology as well.
How does that work?
Well, this is the thing. Within the wreckage, that is what he's saying. So it's very difficult because, again, what we've tried to do in this episode is go from the lack of proof, from hoaxes, all the way to evidence, right? And what we always do in every single episode is go to the evidence as much we possibly can. This is a guy's witness testimony. So he's not refuting it with any evidence. He's not showing us pictures of alien autopsies like we've seen in the hoaxes on this episode. So that's all we can really rely on. It's a man that has a lot of credibility, that would have a lot against him if he was lying. So you can only take him at his word. And I'm certainly taking it at his word. Don't know about you.
Yeah, I think I have to after the context that we've had. I think you have to take him at his word.
Now, the last point I will say on David's testimony is that he said that he hadn't seen any of these images or video himself, but that he'd interviewed over 40 different people that had been at crash sites, that had been in these medical situations. And again, why would they lie if they were military men and women? They'd have nothing to lie for.
I mean, if anything, history would teach them you're better off not saying anything.
Yeah, exactly that. So where are we now in 2026? Obviously, David's given his testimony. Now we have various other organizations, archival elements that are now pulling together all of this information that they physically have, bringing it together in one place and trying to identify it. And there's lots of different instances of this across different nations. Whether that's public to us is very much unsure.
I think it's mad, right? Because we were looking into either a case or a situation recently. When I was watching the video, I was watching it and it was such a big, I can't remember where it actually was, but it must have been in America or something like that. And it was such a big deal, this event that was going on, that they said, you know, the focus is so heavy on this that the CIA and the government have basically admitted to UFOs and aliens, and no one's even really batted an eyelid. And it's only really when you look into it to this extent or hear about it to this extent that you think, fucking hell, they basically have. Well, they have.
They have done it. And this is the thing, look, we've covered as much as we possibly can in one episode. There's so many other instances, cases, events that we haven't been able to describe. And we've done that intentionally because we're trying to tell a story and a narrative about what we've been able to find. And quite frankly, I feel the evidence is so irrefutable now. I think that it's clear, for me at least, and we said this at the start of the episode, that we feel aliens exist. Now, what I want to know is what you guys think in the comments. So please do let us know about your favorite instances of aliens visiting Earth, witness statements, other potential proof that we haven't been able to go through on this episode. There's a huge case of documentary on Amazon about a Brazilian case, which I haven't even been able to go through. So again, anything like that, put it in the comments and there will be a huge discussion, I'm sure, there. And while you're at it, why don't you hit the subscribe button if you aren't a subscriber already, and please do give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Now, before you go, just remember, if you do want these episodes up to 48 hours before anyone else, and also to be able to suggest cases like this, then you need to become a member. There's a link in the description below to join Joey and Josh, and it only costs the price of a coffee in London every single month to join, and you will get all of those benefits that we just mentioned. Thank you so much to all of the members that support this channel. We could not make the content without you.
Thank you so much, guys, for sticking around to the end of another video. We will definitely try and follow it up with similar episodes. But if you want another mind-blowing case that can't really be explained from planet Earth, why not watch the video on screen now about the two Swedish sisters that launched themselves into a British motorway. Thank you again, guys. We will see you all in the next one.